Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. 12 new prospects are on their way to Indy. Today we're going to dive into the Colts selections. We're going to give our grades. We're going to discuss which players we're most excited to see play at Lucas Oil. Also, we talk about our biggest surprises from the draft overall and predict who will take home Rookie of the Year honors. A lot to get into about the NFL draft. It was an exciting 3 days. It had all the things that you love about it. You had the emotions, you had the drama. One of my favorites moments from the weekend was, I don't know his name entirely, but it's Deuce Vaughn's, I think, father.
Oh yes,
Where he got to make the call, basically
that
telling
was
him,
that was really cool.
yeah, that he was going to be drafted by the Cowboys. So that's really neat. You had a lot of cool moments like that. B. Scott, though, how was your week, man? How much of the draft did you enjoy? Did you enjoy all of it? What was your draft weekend experience?
Yeah, I mean, you know me with the draft, I love it. I watched all of Thursday night, all of Friday night, and majority of Saturday. I had a family dinner to attend Saturday night. Luckily, at the restaurant, they had the draft on, so I was, with the family eating dinner and also keeping my eye on the drafts for the seventh round. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was fun this year. I actually got to cover it a little bit for my FCS account, but we didn't. There wasn't really any FCS players. There was 3 players drafted in the first 3 rounds, mostly coming in round 2 and 3 on the second day from the FCS. Leading the way was my sleeper, one of my guys I said could sneak into the first round. That was Cody Mock from North Dakota State. But hey, what a great draft. I mean, so many fun, compelling storylines, like you said, emotions. Yeah, the Deuce Vaughn thing, that was awesome. Like Will Levis falling to the second day. And then the weird incident between Lucas Van Ness's father and Lucas Van
Yeah,
Ness's
I saw
girlfriend.
that. Yeah.
So that was, you just never know what you're going to get with the NFL draft. And I love it, especially with like the cameras that are like the Skyping into prospects home for their party. But yeah, so much emotion. I mean, so cool. That's why I love this draft. It's just one of the coolest times of the year.
Yeah, and it was an amazing weekend, that's for sure. We saw 43 trades happen throughout the course of this weekend. That breaks the record of 40 that happened back in 2019. The Texans, they came out of
Yeah,
the chutes hot. They were ready to
I'm
go.
glad you brought them up because that, I mean, okay, yeah, great. You got your quarterback of the future in CJ Stroud, and then you were still able to land Will Anderson. That looks great and everything on paper. But look, the Texans are still a ways away from being a true contender in the AFC South, and they really just kind of blew up their rebuild. I mean, to be able to move back in to the third spot, they gave up. I mean,
Yes
if
and
you're looking
no,
to rebuild,
I
I
would
mean,
say.
it's they didn't give up as much as I thought they were gonna. They gave up, but it's kind of like it's a very risky move because now look, everybody you looking at towards 2024, everybody is like, hey, the Arizona Cardinals might stink next year. So right now there's a lot of way too early mock drafts and they also say and the Houston Texans are still going to stink next year too. So a lot of these mock drafts actually have the Arizona Cardinals picking 1 and 2. They have them because Houston gave them their first round pick for next year, and then the Arizona's own pick. So they have them like going Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. It's just like ridiculous. It's like, can that really happen? Is this going to happen? Like Houston, you set up a weird possibility because apparently it has happened before. 1992, the Indianapolis Colts actually selected 1 and 2 that year.
Do you have any idea who they picked? I don't know the answer. I didn't know if you knew.
Um, I feel like that was the year that they took Jeff George.
Maybe. I thought Jeff George was
Number,
closer to. No, I guess it wouldn't have had. It couldn't have been because it was. I think when Jeff George, then it went like Harbaugh, and then it went Manning. Right? It was that was the order,
yeah,
something like that. But anyway, yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
But yeah,
um,
I mean, hasn't happened. Something like that hasn't happened since 1992. So it'll be interesting because I don't know. I don't think the Arizona Cardinals are going to stink that bad, like to be a top five, top two pick on their own. But Houston honestly has a possibility of landing Arizona an amazing draft pick to land an amazing talent. Um, so yeah, could be fun.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I personally I like the move. I mean, it's ballsy for sure. I mean, it's something that you're not really used to seeing, and I don't know that. Yeah, it did cost them a lot of draft capital, but man, I mean, we always talk about what Chris Ballard does to get draft capital. I mean, that's what you can do with it when you have all that draft capital. You can
That's
afford
true.
to go up and select second. Be like, hey, you know what? We can't decide between Stroud and and Anderson. Let's go out and get them both, man. Let's go do the thing. So
I mean, this was a total. Have you ever seen the movie Draft Day with Kevin
so
Costner?
I've seen bits and pieces of it on TikTok because the trend now is to cut up sections of a movie on TikTok and put it up there. So I know enough to like know what's going on. But yeah,
But
so
that is exactly what Kevin Costner's character did as the GM of the Browns, and he like made all these moves, and it was just like all of a sudden he got both players that he truly coveted, and this was exactly the plot of that movie.
yeah. Now looking a little bit deeper at the picks by conference and school, the SEC had 62 selections. Georgia and Alabama each with 10. A lot of the Georgia players going to the Eagles. Michigan headlined the Big Ten with nine of the conference's 55 selections. The ACC saw 32 players selected. Clemson and Pitt both had 6. The Big 12 had 30 picks. The Pac-12 had 27. The AAC led the group of 5 with 10 selections. Notable picks for Indiana schools. Just going down the list here, you saw Corey Trice go to the Steelers. The Bengals got Charlie Jones, the wide receiver there. Aiden O'Connell, quarterback, goes to the Raiders. Payne Durham, the tight end, goes to the Buccaneers. And Jalen Graham lands with the 49ers. From Notre Dame, Michael Mayer is taken by the Raiders. So we have two Purdue players going to the Raiders there. Or sorry, two
Nope, that's
Indiana players going to the Raiders
yeah.
is what I mean. We Isaiah Foskey goes to the Saints. And Jarrett Patterson goes to the Texans late. And then one cool
That's a
note is
that's a good move by the Texans.
the Chiefs were able to get a player from Ball State, Ball State
Yeah,
cornerback Nick Jones. So some cool things happening there. And we had over 250 some selections, and 12 of those were the Colts. They were able to just go, do what they've always done, kind of in draft day is, turn, however many picks into, just basically, not really
a
doubling
small
their picks,
army.
but yeah, getting a nice little contingent coming in to Lucas Oil Stadium in 2023. Looking at the selections for the Colts, round 1, pick 4, they go out and get Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida. Great selection there. Last season in Gainesville, he completed 54% of his passes for 2,549 yards, 17 touchdowns, 9 picks. He also ran for 654 yards and 9 touchdowns. Round 2, pick 45, Kansas State cornerback Julius Brents goes to the Horseshoe. He was a 2022 first team member of the Big 12, all Big 12 team. 4 interceptions. That was tied for third in the Big 12. Round 3, pick 79. The Colts go out and get North Carolina wide receiver Josh Downs, who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons the last couple of years. He had 1,335 yards, 8 touchdowns in 2021. Follows that up with 1,029 yards, 11 touchdowns in 2022. He was a 2-time recipient of first-team All-ACC honors and had the second most receptions in FBS the past 2 seasons with 195. His player comp is Tyler Lockett, which heck, if you play fantasy football, you know how electric Tyler Lockett can be to have on your team. Round 4, the Colts were able to get 2 picks in that round, fairly close to each other. At 106, they get BYU offensive tackle Blake Freeland. At 110, they get Northwestern defensive end Aditamiwa Adibare. Made sure and went to NFL.com to make sure I had the pronunciation right there. He was an honorable mention All Big Ten member in 2022. He led the Wildcats in sacks with 5, 38 tackles, 9 for loss, and 2 forced fumbles in the 2022 campaign. Then 4 picks for the Colts in round 5. At 138, they get South Carolina cornerback Darius Rush. He had 15 pass breakups, 3 picks throughout his career. He had a career-high 38 tackles in 2022. His player comp is Richard Sherman,
Wow.
according to CBS, so that's some high praise
Okay.
there. If the Colts can get
Hey, that's a Gus Bradley guy
yeah,
for you.
for sure. Round 5, pick 158. The Colts get Cal safety Daniel Scott. No relation to B. Scott there. Top 5 in the Pac-12 in INTs last year with 3. He had 2 forced fumbles, which also had him in the top 5 in that category last year. Round 5, pick 162. The Colts get Miami tight end Will Mallory, who was a member of the 2022 second team All-ACC squad. 538 yards and 3 touchdowns last season. He's one of the 10 he's among the FBS tight ends the last 2 seasons. He's top 10 there, as far as receiving yards. Round 5, pick 176. You have Northwestern running back Evan Hall. He had 1,009 yards and 7 touchdowns in 2021, 913 yards and 5 touchdowns last season. 546 yards and 2 touchdowns came in the passing game for Evan Hall last season. His player comp is Rex Burkhead, which was a good, kind of out of the backfield, target with the Patriots. Round 6, pick 211. The Colts get Wagner linebacker Titus Leo. Round 7, pick 221. The Colts nab Texas A&M cornerback Jalen Jones, who allowed no touchdowns. And quarterbacks had a 38.5% completion percentage with throwing his way in 2022. So a real lockdown player. I mean, that's numbers in the ACC right there. Which is pretty incredible. And then rounding out the Colts draft, round 7, pick 236 is Northern Michigan offensive tackle Jake Witt. So there you go, 12 players on their way to the Circle City. And when we look at a grade for this draft, I was trying to think of where I wanted to go with it. Last season, I gave Ballard a solid B. This year, I'm going B+. I know I've seen some places that give him, an A minus. I'll get to why it's not that here in a second. But you look at the average grade of the top 6 players for the Colts this year. Through which goes through the start of round 5. ESPN graded them out on an average of a B. It's like right at 80%. And they went right down the line as far as getting the team's biggest needs. I talked about last, in our draft preview show for the Colts that, they needed a quarterback, a cornerback, a wide receiver, an offensive lineman, and they went in that order too. They were like, okay, what's the checklist? All right, we got our quarterback. Hey, we got our wide receiver. Or, hey, we got a cornerback. Hey, we got our offensive lineman. There are some things I thought I could nitpick that I thought, hey, I'd rather see this player in a Colts uniform. For instance, Joey Porter Jr. or Keely Ringo at the cornerback position. I talked about Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee as a sleeper there. But to those points, Julius Brents is the tallest of the cornerback prospects in the top 10, and which is a huge attribute to have, being one of the tallest guys in that category, and he's still a great prospect. So, not like the Colts didn't get a great player in Julius Brents, and then Josh Downs was actually ranked higher than Hyatt by CBS. So, I try to find some things to be critical because I was like, am I being too soft? Because I feel like I've given, Ballard a B the last few years. And so I was like, am I being too soft? And so that's what I was kind of looking at there even when I try to nitpick, the draft, I've ended up being like, okay, actually, no, that was a good pick. Oh yeah, no, I actually like that pick now that I think about it a little bit more. All in all, this was a typical Ballard draft where he ended up, with a boatload of draft capital, and brought in a lot of strong talent and depth and hit on all the team needs exactly. I went through our old outlines and looked at the other draft grades I've given out. I was afraid I was being too critical, like I said. First year we did grades was 2020, and that was the Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman draft. I gave that one an A, so I was like, okay, based on that curve, I don't know if I quite want to go with an A for this one. It's definitely close to that mark. It's probably the closest we've been to that mark. I gave 2021 a C, 2022 a B, so I feel better about a B plus here. So it's right there on that threshold of being an A minus B plus. But needless to say, I was pessimistic about this draft, and I definitely am not coming out on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, this draft, I was telling you off air, I thought Chris Ballard, outside of the Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman draft, I mean, because that obviously yielded two really good talents. Um, I felt he knocked this one out of the park. I mean, he hit on every team need. He brought in, got good value. I feel like with some of these picks where he ended up getting them, like Julius Brents. I didn't think he would be available. Like for them to trade back twice and for him to still be available. I know everybody thought the Colts loved Keely Ringo. He would have been a good pickup as well. Julius Brents has the size though, and I think one of the deciding factors also he is an Indianapolis native. He's a graduate of Warren Central High School, so that always helps as well. But and that obviously probably wasn't the deciding factor. There was other reasons, but this just draft, I'm going to give it a solid A because when I start going through it, I look at like obviously Anthony Richardson I thought was a great pick. I mean, he's going to take a little bit of time to develop, but the Colts having Gardner Minshew does afford that ability, and also because the Colts aren't in a win now mode. But Anthony Richardson paired with Shane Steichen, this is going to has the potential to be a really, really good pickup. I mean, Anthony Richardson's comp by a lot of people on ESPN on draft day, they were comparing him to Cam Newton with a little bit of a higher upside. So that's actually really exciting to see. And then being able to get Josh Downs in the third round, I mean, I thought he would be going about where the Colts were picking originally in the second round. So being able to pick him up there is great. Blake Freeland is a guy that I was really hoping the Colts would land. He's a super athletic tackle. He's really good in the run block, which is, hey, that's great with Jonathan Taylor. He does have to get a little bit better with his pass blocking, but that's fine. Honestly, Blake Freeland, if he could add about 20 more pounds to his frame, he could potentially be a starting tackle on this offensive line. I don't know too much about the Ade Tamiwa Adebawore pick. Because when you watch Northwestern, they weren't very good this year. So nothing really stood out there. I mean, I'll be honest, I wasn't consistently watching Northwestern because of that. Darius Rush, he's such an interesting prospect to me because he came into college. He started off as a wide receiver and just recently made the switch to cornerback. He's got amazing speed. Was graded out as one of the fastest corners at the combine this year. So that's really great. Daniel Scott is interesting to me as well. He's going to be a key special teams player, but he's also one of those guys that he can step back in the safety role or he can come up and play in the slot at corner as well. And honestly, I kind of hope he makes a good name for himself because I would love to buy a Daniel Scott jersey, just to have a jersey that says Scott and actually be a player on the team. Will Mallory, that was an interesting pick. You kind of laughed at me when I said the Colts should pick a tight end. You said that's a full room. You're right, it is. Will Mallory, though, graded out as one of the faster tight ends in the draft. Also, fun fact, he is the grandson of the late Indiana football coach, Bill Mallory. So a little bit of a tie there. Evan Hall, I love this pick. He kind of fits into the scheme a little bit of where Nyheim Hines has been in the past. He is a good running back, but he's more well known for his pass catching abilities out of the backfield. So I can't wait to see what they do with him. Um, Wagner linebacker Titus Leo. I feel like this could be one of those picks that, Chris Ballard always finds a diamond in the rough, and that kind of is what this pick is. And then Texas A&M quarterback Jalen Jones. I mean, for somebody that you know was pretty much a shutdown corner in the SEC to fall to the seventh round, that's really interesting to me. And then Jake Witt, another athletic offensive lineman coming from Northern Michigan. There's not much tape or numbers on him because he's coming from Northern Michigan. They just didn't have much info, but I love that pick as well. Good value in the seventh round. Look, the Colts, what the big theme of the draft for them this year was athletic ability. This team, the Colts put together one of the most athletic hauls in the 2023 NFL draft. If you look at the relative athletic scores for the players that the Colts picked up, I mean, Anthony Richardson with a perfect score of 10, Julius Brents with a 9.99, Josh Downs with an 8.99, Blake Freeland with a 9.83, Adetamwa yeah, 9.72, Darius Russ 9.8, Daniel Scott 9.94, Will Mallory 9.05, Evan Hall 9.32, Titus Leo 8.48, Jalen Jones 8.79, and there wasn't a relative score for Tyler Witt because they're just or Jake Witt just because there was not any he was not at the combine and there wasn't really any information available for him. But I mean, this just shows that Ballard was looking to bring in an influx of elite athletes in this draft, and he accomplished that hands down. And like as I said, you can see in the relative athletic score, the Colts I feel like knocked this one out of the park and were one of the better drafting teams this year.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about all that athleticism, and that's what like really makes me excited to watch these guys get on the field because especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, it really feels like the Colts are starting to get a strong like core for the future. It kind of it finally kind of after last season really didn't really know what direction the Colts were going in. Now you finally kind of see a direction, and I'm excited to watch a lot of these guys get on the field. I mean, first and foremost, Anthony Richardson. I think he might be the most excited. I'm probably the most excited to see him get on the field. I know that's kind of the
Yeah.
obvious, the obvious one getting off the jump here, but touched on it last week. You touched on it as well. His player comp was Cam Newton on CBS. His comp on ESPN is Josh Allen. And most importantly, it was noted in his post-draft analysis that by ESPN that he has similar traits to Jalen Hurts, who Shane Steichen turned into a Super Bowl caliber quarterback this past season. You touched on Gardner Minshew as well. I'm really, I say I'm excited to watch Anthony Richardson. I'm actually hoping that I'll be seeing Gardner Minshew for the first few weeks as Anthony Richardson develops, and I think it also
Hey, and
matters that
Jim Irsay has come out and said that it is or Irsay and Ballard have come out and said it is ultimately up to Coach Steichen of when the reins will be handed over to Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and what I think it makes it all that more better is the fact that Minshew played for the Eagles last season. He was in Shane Steichen's system, and that may even help kind of accelerate the learning curve that Anthony Richardson is going to have and the developmental curve because hey, if he's got any issues, he's got a guy right in that room aside from Steichen who can be like, hey, this is how things are done. So that's really something that could be cool. I could see the plan being starting Minshew Mania until the bye week. Usually the Colts have a later bye week, so I can see hey, it's week 10. The Colts are going into their bye week. They're whatever, or maybe even whatever week they play on Thursday. That could also be an option as well. They're gearing up for a Thursday night game. They play their Thursday night game against the Broncos, a rematch of the greatest
Oh
Thursday
God.
night game of all
Oh God.
time.
You're
And
you're bringing up. I saw a TikTok recently, just this a couple days ago, of somebody saying, "Ah, great. Here's a potential Thursday night matchup we could see in the future: Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson." 4 touchdowns thrown to 6 interceptions combined between the two quarterbacks, because the biggest knock on both of those quarterbacks obviously was accuracy.
Right.
So yeah, that's a potential Thursday night matchup, because that's one we've seen before, the Titans and the Colts several times.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it could be either like basically the second bye that you get with that, or you could see after their actual bye. So that's a really cool thing. Richardson's an elite athlete. He's gonna go into the season with a lot of talent at his disposal. I mean, looking at just kind of down the roster, I mean, hopefully you're gonna get a full season of a healthy JT. You've got Zach Moss, who at the end of the season showed flashes. You bring in Hall. Josh Downs joins a wide receiver core of Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Isaiah McKenzie. You did mention the full tight end room. It's headlined by Kylan Grants and Jelani Woods. Unfortunately, I can kind of see Mo Alley Cox kind of being on that edge of
Yeah,
being
but
pushed. I mean,
he is your best inline blocker in that room,
right. So
and
I
a
don't.
veteran presence. I mean, so that's what's really tough, is like if you're gonna go for a running game, like an RPO type uh,
Yeah, that's true.
strategy. I mean, Mo Alley Cox right there is one of your better blockers at tight end, whereas that's where Will Mallory was one of the weakest. He's not a very good blocker, but so I don't know, that it's going to be interesting because that room is very crowded.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like this is the right system for Anthony Richardson. And there's a great young core around him for him to thrive in. So really excited to see him. And that's there's a lot of exciting things about what they did on defense as well. I mean, Adetamewa Adebare, he's got great strength and speed. Ran the fastest. We've talked about athleticism a lot tonight already. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash of any player over 280 pounds since 2006 at the
See,
compound earlier this year.
athletes,
Exactly.
athletes.
And not only that, not only is he quick, but he's got versatility. He can play on the edge. He can move inside a defensive tackle. You love that versatility, and which is great because you have an already great D line that the Colts are already. You have a lot of great players on that defensive line for the Colts, and so that now that you bring in another guy who can kind of move around and be plugged in where he's needed, that just makes him all that more better. So I mean, there's a lot of players to be excited about for the Colts this year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on offense, you look at Anthony Richardson first and foremost, but for me, I'm really kind of looking at Josh Downs as my player I'm most excited for. Um, Everybody thought when Will McKenzie or Isaiah McKenzie was brought in that he was going to be the starter from the get go, the replacement of Paris Campbell. I'm not 100% sure of that anymore because of what Josh Downs brings to the table. I mean, he has great control of his body. He knows how to make contested catches, whether it's on the outside, the inside, across the middle. I mean, he's going to be a fun one to watch. I mean, when we look at his size and everything, I think his biggest comparable is T.Y. Hilton for this team, because look, when T.Y. was drafted, I said it. I didn't think he was going to be much of anything more than a glorified punt returner. Josh Downs can do that as well. So, I mean, Josh Downs has the ability, I think, is going to give the Colts something that they haven't had since T.Y. Hilton was kind of more in his prime. Something that we all thought Paris Campbell could become, but just couldn't stay healthy. Um, yeah, so I'm really excited to see what kind of element Josh Downs brings to this Colts offense, especially with the way Shane Steichen's going to run it. I can't wait. Can I say Shane Steichen as the player I'm most excited to see on offense, even though he's the head coach? I can't wait to see what he is able to do, the kind of offense he chooses to run with this team, just based off of what we saw from Philadelphia recently. On defense, the player that I'm most excited to watch there is South Carolina cornerback Darius Rush. Like I said, he used to play wide receiver, switched over to corner. One of the things about him is he he's not a clean route runner with wide receivers all the time, but he's got the speed to make up for that. He ran in the 4.3 range for the 40 at the combine. So he's fast. So he's got the speed. He knows how to high point a ball. His background as a wide receiver is going to pay dividends here for him. because he's got that size, he's got the speed, and he can think like a wide receiver. So I'm really excited to watch him. I guess second for me would obviously be Julius Brents, just because of his size as well. I mean, look, Gus Bradley has he's going to making over this secondary here. He's bringing in the players that he like the attributes that he likes in his secondary players, and that's length. And this draft for the Colts was not lacking in length in the defensive secondary for sure.
So before we move on to the draft as a whole, one final kind of question here: on a scale of hot to cold, what's your level of optimism from this draft? For me, it's warm. As I noted before, I went in the draft very pessimistic. As we all know, I said, Ballard addressed all the Colts' needs. He didn't do anything crazy, and he came away with 12 picks. I said it before that. I said it last week that, or maybe it was during the Colts draft preview, that I said like it basically my optimism level all hinges on the first pick, and a lot of the pessimism came from the discussion and the talks and the rumors that the Colts were going to take Will Levis. I did not want Will Levis. I thought, yes, you have your obvious 1 and 2 in Stroud and Young. You have your, and then after that you have Richardson Levis, and then after that there's another drop off. And I thought between those two, Richardson, I kind of came around on Richardson. I talked myself into it. Not, and I feel different from the time from last year when I talked myself into Matt Ryan. Last year, I didn't like the decision to go get Matt Ryan. I talked myself into it, and then my gut instinct was right all along. Not necessarily that he'd be that bad, but that he wasn't the solution the Colts necessarily needed. This year, I was so excited to potentially get Stroud, and then once that was off the board, I kind of got pessimistic. But then I looked at Richardson and Levis. I came around on Richardson. So when all the discussion was, oh hey, the Colts are going to take Levis, I was like, please do not take Will Levis. I mean, if you need any bigger red flag, he puts mayo in his coffee. That's all you need to know about him. And so
Well, no, actually, if you listen to what some of the guys were like, Mel Kiper and them were talking about, with one of the biggest reasons he fell was teams just get turned off by some of the stuff that they saw from him,
yeah,
such as the mirror selfies, his infatuation with the gun show with his arms. It's like, look, tight like quarterbacks don't look like that anymore. Like even like the Peyton Mannings of the world, they weren't like ripping these huge biceps or anything. So the infatuation he had with himself was something that really turned teams off and was one of the key contributors to why he fell.
right.
They just like if you're 2-2 yourself, how are you going to be able to handle leading a team?
But yeah, to tie a bow on it, that my pessimism was that I didn't want the Colts to draft Will Levis. I knew the fourth pick was going to kind of set the tone for how the draft was going to go, and how I was going to view the draft. And so when it got off hot with them getting Richardson, I felt pretty good from there on out. So yeah, no, I'm back into positive vibes, positive spirits when it comes to the Colts.
So for me, I'm warmer than warm, but not hot. I'm kind of somewhere in between. That perfect place where you get in the shower and it's like, yeah, this is a perfect temperature. Um, I say that because the Colts, they answered a lot of questions, filled in a lot of needs, but they are still in a position where we all kind of know, like we can all see a general direction they're going in, which is great. That's what the Colts needed. They needed a vision. The Colts have a vision now. They know the direction they want to go in, and it's eventually we're going to get there. It's just be prepared for another bumpy season. And I'm kind of happy about that, just based off of the prospects coming into next year's draft, which is absolutely loaded. Now the Colts, most likely, if you know, even just because they be possibly picking in the top 5, top 10, doesn't mean they need a quarterback. Um, we can't be at Tennessee and draft a new quarterback and hopes that that's the replacement every year. But the Colts have the opportunity, to gain these young guys experience and still be able to build for the future to become a legitimate long-term Super Bowl contender. And that makes me very optimistic about the future. Does that make me? Am I optimistic as far as wins go for this next season? No, I'm not. Um, but that in the long run, that's actually a good thing. So, but hey, if I'm proven wrong and the Colts come out and look a ton better and make the playoffs, I'll be like, hey, that's fine because that means the development of these players is ahead of schedule. Yeah, did we miss out on a player like Marvin Harrison Jr.? Yeah, we did. But hey, it's okay because um, things are looking better now. So I think it's going to be a win-win regardless
Oh yeah, I like I
next
said,
season.
I think it's finally seems like the Colts have a direction where for a lot of last year in this offseason to start off with, it did not look like that was
And
going to
the
be the case.
Colts actually have a quarterback that's different. It's different for the Colts. I mean, Andrew Luck was probably the most athletic quarterback the Colts have had in recent memory. And I mean, by no means was he like a tuck it and run as much as he can type player. He did out of necessity, and look where that got him. But the Colts like recently have just been bringing in these statues almost. So it's going to be really interesting to watch a player like Anthony Richardson under center with the Colts. And I mean, oh my gosh, him and Jonathan Taylor, that tandem could has the potential to be one of the best QB running back tandems in the NFL because now with Anthony Richardson out there, defenses are going to have to pause for a second when he goes to hand off the ball because is he keeping it? Is he really handing it to Jonathan Taylor? They have to read the moment, and that's going to give either one of them enough time to put up some pretty big numbers. So I read somewhere somebody say, yeah, Jonathan Taylor's touches may decrease, but ultimately could see his yardage go up because of um, the threat of Anthony Richardson running.
I like that you brought up Andrew Luck because that's another thought that I had. I think either yesterday morning or this morning, where I was like, hopefully Richardson can come out and be. I mean, obviously he's not the prospect that Andrew Luck was, but hopefully he can come out and be good because I am so tired of Ryan Grigson getting credit for drafting Andrew Luck. So hopefully now, drafting Anthony Richardson, he can become a good enough player to where that kind of quiets that part of the Grigson is better than Ballard tandem there. So hopefully that could be the case. But let's go ahead before we get out of here. Let's go ahead and talk about the draft as a whole. Because there was a lot of things to look at as far as the NFL draft as a whole. First of all, there were some big surprises. Both in terms of where guys were drafted as well as where guys fell. And that of course we'll get to that a little bit because I think the biggest story obviously was how far a certain player fell in this draft. But this draft really kind of confused me as far as the cornerback position is concerned. That's kind of where I want to start off with as far as surprises go. Because CBS for starters, CBS had Oregon cornerback Christian Gonzalez as the seventh best prospect off the board. A lot of mocks had him going in the top 10. He goes to the Pats at 17, which is super scary. Reminds me of when they got Patrick Chung, who ended up being a good player for them out of Oregon. The Pats defense already has some great playmakers. They were a top 8 defensive team last season, and they'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what that defense does now that they're going to be going up against Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Tua next season. So that division is going to be fun as always. Joey Porter Jr. Was a first rounder in a lot of mocks I saw, and I know he literally
was a
went
top 10
right,
mocked in a lot of
right.
drafts.
And so, I know obviously he got picked literally the first pick of the second round, so that's not super far off. But
technically, that should have been
the
the
first
last
round
pick of the first
because he's
round.
32nd. Yeah.
So,
But
Yeah.
still though, he was supposed to go in the first round and higher than he was supposed to go like comfortably in the first round, and he went in the second round, which was confusing. And then Keely Ringo, I think, was the biggest surprise because he was projected as a second rounder, according to NFL.com, and he went in the fourth round to Philly. So that was a surprising thing. But yeah, there was a lot of players in this draft that I feel like were projected to go higher, and they ended up going lower than expected and slipping a little bit.
Yeah, I mean there were quite a few, but on the Joey Porter thing, how cool is it that he's gonna play for the Pittsburgh Steelers where his dad played,
Oh yeah, that's
and made a
amazing,
big name for himself. That's really cool. That also makes me feel old. um,
right?
the cornerbacks, that is interesting as well. I mean, Devin Witherspoon being the first corner off the board, that's not too surprising. He was projected to be up around there anyways. But for Christian Gonzalez to be the third corner off the board and behind a Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State, that was definitely surprising. But the thing that stood out to me the most was how much teams put I guess, higher grades on running backs in the top 15. We saw Bijan Robinson go number 8 to the Atlanta Falcons and Jahmyr Gibbs go number 12 to the Detroit Lions. Um, you know, typically you're going to find here recently, you're going to find good value or some really good value at running back late in the first round, definitely early in the second round. And I feel like Jahmyr Gibbs, at least, maybe not Bijan Robinson, but Jahmyr Gibbs was projected to be somebody that was picked around the early part of the second round, late end of the first round. So for him to be picked 12th, I feel like that was kind of a reach. I mean, is he going to be a good player for the Detroit Lions? I think so. I think yes. Um, but I feel like they're going to put way too much on his shoulders early, especially after they traded DeAndre Swift to the Philadelphia Eagles. That is, I'm afraid Detroit's going to get not burned, but it's going to be a letdown for them. He's going to be a good player, but I don't think it's going to be immediately, and I don't think he's going to be able to put up the production that DeAndre Swift put up for them in the past. So my biggest surprise was definitely seeing two running backs picked in the top 15.
Well, and remember, Lions also let Jamal Williams walk this offseason as well. So
Yeah.
that running back, there's going to be a lot of question marks in that running back room going into the season. That's for sure. In terms of how far they fell, that's the big that was the big discussion on night number one, with Will Levis falling. It is kind of wild that Tennessee the last 2 years ends up coming away with the quarterback that fell the furthest. They where we thought that, heck, I think last year we had Malik Willis in the top 10. We had a team taking a flyer on him. He ended up going in the third round. This year, Will Levis, a lot of the talk was that he was going to be second overall, potentially, and he ends up going in the second round. He was talked about a lot as the option for the Colts. So when he started to fall, it's just kind of one of those surprising things. And I was listening to another podcast, the Ryan Russillo podcast, where they were interviewing a draft expert, and he was talking about how it's surprising that a team didn't trade back into the first round to get Will Levis. In the sense that, like, I know trading for a first round pick obviously will come with a lot of draft capital that you have to give up, but also you get that 5th-year option tagged on with a first round pick as opposed to a second round pick. So interesting decision there. But the comps I've seen for Will Levis have been all over the place. I mean, I've seen him compared to Josh Allen. I've seen him compared to Jay Cutler. I've seen him compared to Carson Wentz. So his ceiling's really high, his floor is really low. So it may turn into one of those things where we're talking about it in a few years. Like, look, all 32 teams passed on the chance to go get Will Levis, or we're talking about him. Hey, you know what? We thought he was going to fizzle out, and he ended up fizzling out. So who knows where he's going to end up? But definitely one of the biggest surprises of the entire draft was Will Levis falling.
Oh yeah, I mean that is easily the biggest surprise. But for me, I guess the other one I'm going to look at is tight end Michael Mayer from Notre Dame. He was projected to be top 20, top 25 pick. Um, it looked like he was graded out as the second best tight end overall on the draft boards for most people, behind Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid was just he's a beast among. He was just a different type of prospect. But for Michael Mayer to end up going 35th overall in the third tight end selected, he was selected right behind Sam Laporta. Um, is kind of interesting. Yeah, I know the knock on him is he doesn't have the longer arms that you like to have from a tight end, but he was very productive. I was honestly really surprised to see him fall. The other player that kind of stood out to me that fell pretty far was Minnesota center John Michael Schmitz. He was viewed as the best interior or best center in this draft, but he fell pretty far. I mean, honestly, when you look at this draft, teams weren't very high on interior offensive linemen, and there was some good value there for them, I thought, but they just weren't picked quite like some people thought John Michael Schmitz would be a first round pick, and he ended up being the second center off the board behind Joe Topman from Wisconsin. Um, so I think those two players really stood out to me the most for falling. Obviously, Julius Brents and Josh Downs for the Colts, I've already gone over. Those two kind of fell a little bit farther. Keely Ringo from Georgia falling all the way to the fourth round. That was another one as well. But I think Michael Mayer falling out of the first round and it ended up being the third tight end taken was kind of a big surprise to me.
Now, one kind of interesting thing with Levis going to the Titans at 33 is the fact that 3 of the 4 AFC South teams selected quarterbacks in this draft. You see C.J. Stroud go number 2 to the Texans, Anthony Richardson go number 4 to the Colts, and of course Will Levis going at 33 to the Titans. And so I thought it might be a fun exercise, especially with what we did last week, talking about like, oh, could Bryce Young going to the Panthers, could that mean the Panthers are a playoff team? What does the AFC South outlook look like? I mean, what's our way too early AFC South predictions? Since 9-8 won the division last season and 75% of the AFC South teams finished below 500, what does this look like? For me, looking at what the AFC South looks like, I think Jacksonville's still going to be the team to beat. They have a top 10 offense or had a top 10 offense last season in terms of points per game. Trevor Lawrence made great strides in year 2. That was a passing offense that was top 10 last season. Oh, by the way, they bring in Calvin Ridley, who's ready to prove a few points this season. It was the best scoring defense of AFC South teams in 2022. ESPN isn't really fond of their draft, but they did hit on all their positions, of need. NFL.com had them as a B plus as far as their draft is concerned. So I think Jacksonville's still the team that I would go with. Tennessee, number 2. Ryan Tannehill is still listed as the QB1 on the depth chart. And after not missing a game the last 2 seasons, Tannehill only started 12 games last season, so he's typically been durable in Tennessee. Just ran into some injuries last season, so he should be back. But even then, quarterback play obviously isn't super important. It's not what defines the Titans' offense. They've been in the bottom half of the league in passing the last 2 seasons, including the bottom 3 last year. This was a team that nearly beat the Chiefs with Malik Willis only throwing for 84 yards and did beat the Texans with Malik Willis only having like 54 yards passing. So, they obviously their strength is Derrick Henry, and that's kind of the biggest difference from when they were the number 1 seed in the AFC in 2021 and and out of the playoffs last season is that the running game went from 5th in 2021 to 13th last year, and then they remedied that. They added depth to their offensive line by taking Peter Skoronski at 11, Jalen Duncan at 186. So I think the Titans, in my opinion, Mike Vrabel is the best coach in the AFC South. I think he's going to, have this team back on track. It's a close toss-up between them and Jacksonville, but I think those are still the 2 best teams in that division. And then I go back and forth with the Texans and the Colts. I mean, both teams have first-year head coaches. Both teams took quarterbacks with their first picks. Both were bottom 4 of the league, in the bottom 4th of the league in scoring offense, total offense, and scoring defense. I think I'm going to lean Colts for 3rd. I'll take the talent in Indy and what they have on offense, and JT and Michael Pittman compared to what the Texans have. D'Amico Ryans is defensive mind, and they have a lot of sound players on that side. They get Will Anderson, but at the end of the day, the Colts still have a good defense in their own right. So I think I like the offense for the Colts better than I like the offense for the Texans. So at the end of the day, it ends up being the same exact order as it finished out last year. I thought maybe by doing this exercise, I might find a reason to maybe put flip flop some teams. But I think after all kind of the dust settles and oh hey look three quarterbacks went to the same division, I think it's gonna look more of the same at least for the first season.
Yeah, I mean, Jacksonville is, I mean, you're the division winner from the reigning division champ. It's yours until otherwise proven. I thought they had a pretty good draft. I mean, Anton Harrison in the first round. You got to protect Trevor Lawrence, and then Britton Strange at tight end, giving him some a little bit more weapons. I thought they had a good draft, but obviously they have the youngest, most experienced quarterback. I feel like in the AFC South. I put youngest there because obviously Ryan Tannehill is the most experienced overall. But yeah, Jacksonville at 1. I'm going with you as well. Tennessee at 2. Um, I just felt like the injury bug really hit them hard last year, and that team is better than what their final record was. So honestly I wouldn't be surprised to see Tennessee as the division winner. But for now, I'm putting them at 2. Um, I am going to put the Texans at 3 just because I feel like CJ Stroud is a little bit more of a plug and play player immediately. And the Colts will be kind of figuring out, like, grooming Anthony Richardson to get him ready to play. So there's going to be kind of that back and forth, and that could be a little bit of a distraction. Not a bad distraction, but a distraction nonetheless, because you're going to be splitting reps between Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew, obviously. So there's not that continuity is going to be tough to come by. So I am putting the Texans as the third team in the standings for the AFC South, and then I'm going to put the Colts at the 4 for right now. But yeah, it's just kind of based off of the drafts. I mean, Will Anderson is if the Colts offensive line plays the way they did last year, Will Anderson's going to eat whoever the Colts quarterback is alive early on. So that's going to be tough to overcome. And also with a defensive minded coach, look, you got 2 heavily defensive minded coaches in this division. You got 2 offensive minded coaches as well. So it's going to be an interesting division because of the quarterback youth movement that we could see in the next year or so. So,
Yeah,
but that's kind of where I stand with the AFC South right now.
yeah, for sure. I think the Colts and Texans are going to make strides forward. But yeah, still at the bottom of the division. And then yeah, I think the Titans and Jaguars are still kind of the class of that division. One last thing today that I want to get to is our way too early Rookie of the Year predictions for offense and defense. So looking at that, who we think is going to be, the rookie of the year on the offensive side. It's hard not to go Bryce Young here, especially with what we talked about last week with the possibility of the Panthers, winning the NFC South. And obviously if the Panthers go out and win the NFC South, then I think he's going to be the easy pick for that honor. But I'm actually going to go with Jordan Addison here. He was drafted 24th overall by the Vikings. Wide receivers have won the last 2 offensive rookie of the year honors. I know last week I bumped up the point that running backs have won 4 of the last 10. Well, it hasn't happened since 2018, so we'll see what happens there. But the last 2 have been wide receivers. He was the Blitnikoff Award winner in 2021. He had first team All ACC honors and first team All Pac-12 honors the last 2 seasons. His player comp is Keenan Allen. Minnesota has a good chance to win the NFC North, and if they aren't already favorites to win the division going into the season, the Vikings were 6th in passing last season. Adam Thielen no longer there, and obviously Justin Jefferson's going to command a lot of attention on that side of the ball. He's going to, a lot of teams are going to hone in on him defensively, and that's going to open up the door for a guy like Addison to get some solid touches, get some good playing time in, get some good, have some great numbers. And so that's why I'm going with him on the offensive side. I think he's primed to have a fantastic year at the wide receiver position and win Offensive Rookie of the Year. My pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year, I tried to look at the positions there. No position has won in consecutive seasons since 2013, 2014, so that rules out the cornerback position because Sauce Gardner came away with it last year. It's tough not to go Will Anderson here. He's got his player comps Von Miller, who was literally the Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2011. So, I mean, if you want to, kind of a quick answer there, it's kind of like boom, boom, there you go. The guy that it was the third pick in the draft. It was literally compared to a guy who's won Defensive Rookie of the Year before. But I'm actually going to go with Jalen Carter. First team All SEC in 2022. Goes to an Eagles team that defensively had an astounding 70 sacks in 2022, which is the third most by a team for a single season. And, sure, the numbers won't be that crazy this year. I mean, they're not going to replicate that year. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, he's being inserted into a defense that's only going to, he's being inserted into a defense where he's going to do nothing but boost that defense and make them just as good. He's going to be a force on that defensive line. That defensive line is seasoned. They're going to be able to help him. What I think is funny too is that his player comp is Fletcher Cox, who's literally his teammate in Philly. So I think that's going to just do nothing but, give him what he needs to be successful. And I think his career gets going with Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna start with my defensive one because I'm going with Jalen Carter as well. I think he's gonna come in. The off the field issues with him were, you know, he was involved in the car wreck that killed a Georgia staffer and a player. He was in the other car that they were racing. So, it wasn't like okay, it was bad, but it wasn't like, man, this guy, you know, been popped for drugs and this, that, and the other. You know, I think Jalen Carter's going to come in, put his nose down, really learn from Fletcher Cox. Having somebody like that in the room with him is going to really help him immensely. He's going to come in, have a chip on his shoulder, put his nose down, and just play hard. And I think he's going to do really well for the Philadelphia Philadelphia Eagles. um, Seriously, that defense is the last two Georgia defenses that have been considered some of the best.
But you know what? Like, honestly, that's not a bad strategy if you think about it.
No.
Because, like, that same podcast I was listening to, the Russillo podcast about, where they're talking about, the draft, and he was like, they're like, look, there was a period of time for a while that if the Dolphins had just drafted, players from the University of Miami, like, they would have been a really good team because they're like, sometimes just don't overthink it. Take the players from the best team in the country.
Well, and like Howie Roseman, their GM, said, like, look, it is a big adjustment for a player to come into the NFL, and it's pretty much like being a freshman again, your rookie year. And if you can have a bunch of guys come in from the same team, that kind of helps the transition process a lot better for them, because it's like when you go to college and you're living with like your best friend. You're making that transition from high school to college, and it's so much smoother to have a group of friends that you've grown up with or have been with for a while to make that transition together. So that really helps. And I never thought of it that way. Howie Roseman was hit the nail right on the head, I thought. I mean, but we're all going to make fun of them still because all they've been doing is drafting Alabama and Georgia players, and well, it's working.
Right.
So,
pretty sure they were in the Super Bowl this past year.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I think it's going well.
And what's funny is, like, he goes, Yeah, we don't have a ton of Georgia players. It's not all Georgia players. And about the same time the news was breaking that they traded for DeAndre Swift, it's like, yeah, well, okay, maybe we do. But all right, moving on to offensive. This one I think is a little bit harder to pick. There's three players I'm looking at. I'm looking at Jackson Smith and Jigba. One because for these first two are going to be pretty similar reasons. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be playing alongside DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, so there's going to be opportunity there for him um, to be that open guy because that's going to be a sneaky good wide receiving core in Seattle. The other player that I'm looking at is Zay Flowers, the wide receiver out of Boston College. He went to the Baltimore Ravens. He's got a league MVP throwing to him. And then at the same time, they've been bringing in pieces to help the wide receiving core for Lamar Jackson. So he's going to be playing alongside Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, that same reasons for Jackson Smith and Jigba go for Zay Flowers as well. But the player that I'm going to ultimately land on as my offensive rookie of the year is running back Bijan Robinson, who was taken 8th overall by the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, I know I said earlier that one of the biggest surprises to me was the value that teams put on running backs early in this draft. Bijan Robinson was one of those players, though, that was worthy of that grade. He's probably the best running back prospect, like all around, probably since Saquon Barkley. I would kind of put a little bit of a player comp there for him. And also the fit, the scheme that Atlanta likes to run. Atlanta is a heavy run team, and Bijan Robinson he's really good. He is a legit running back good. And I think when you look at that scheme and how many touches he's actually going to get, that's going to help him in the voting because his numbers are going to be inflated just due to the scheme he's in. And you know that it's a great fit overall. So I'm picking Bijan Robinson because not only is he a good running back, but he can also catch the ball out of the backfield, which can end up also being a new quarterback's best friend if they end up running with Desmond Ridder this year at quarterback. That's going to be a big security blanket for him there. So that's what I'm going with. I think just based off of scheme, he's got the opportunity to put up huge numbers early for the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I mean his player comp for like a couple of the mocks that I saw was Saquon Barkley, and that's one of the reasons why I said like, hey, he's gonna make an impact no matter where he goes, because who couldn't use another Saquon Barkley on their team? So that's gonna be good, and also I mean again another team, that NFC South is wide open. So if the Falcons are good, and he's the reason, he could very well be the reason why. So that's a good pick for Bijan Robinson there. But that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go follow us over on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. Go over to the YouTube channel. If you're not already there, subscribe, like, ring the bell. Go follow us over on TikTok. We're over 2.5K over there, so go give us some love. And remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
Well, as you guys all know, it's the month of May, and that's what we'll be getting into next week. We'll be talking about IndyCar, getting ready for the Indy GP, and gearing up for the Indy 500. It's going to be a lot of fun. Excited to talk about that, but until then, have a good week, everybody.